I'll be hosting a conversation between Laurie Graham and Margaret Christakos, two poets doing very exciting things in the area. And you guys are going to hear some very cool readings from them, and then we're going to have a conversation. I'm going to ask a few questions, and then we're going to open it up to questions from the audience. So yeah, I'm really excited to be here, in part because I think this is the most comfortable chair I've ever sat on. So don't have anything like this at home. But also because these two people have been vital to the poetry community in this area and have helped to nourish that very positive community, which has been important for me and so many other people in this room. So I'll begin by introducing both of them in order that they will be reading. So, Laurie D. Graham is a writer, reviewer, and editor currently living in Kitchener. She has 2 books of poetry, the first of which, Rove, was shortlisted for the Gerald Lampert Memorial Award for Best Book of Poetry, first book of poetry in Canada. Her second book, just out recently, is called Settler Education, and it's out from McClelland Stewart. Laurie is also the publisher of Brick Magazine, and she's on the editorial board of the Oscana Poetry and Poetics series, a new series from the University of Guelph Press. And Margaret Christakos is a walker in the field of letters. Since 1989, she has published 9 poetry collections, 1 novel, and most recently, an intra-genre memoir. She teaches creative writing as a sessional with OCAD University and since 2006 with U of T Continuing Studies. Currently, she's Canada Council Writer-in-Residence at Western University in partnership with London Public Library. She'll be reading today from her poetry collection recently released from Coach House titled Multitudes, and from her paraphernalia from a book that's called Her Paraphernalia on Other Lines, Sex, Blood, Loss, and Selfies, published by Book Thug in 2016. So I'll hand it over to Laurie.
Hi everybody. I'm going to stand and read to you because those couches are too comfortable. Thank you for coming. It's so great to be back in London. I'm going to read from Settler Education. Last I saw there was 1 copy sitting on the book table out there, so if you need others, just come see me. I've got time for a few poems. I'll start with the very first one in the book. It's called Number 1 Canadian, and it's about, this book starts with various methods of getting to the western half of the country, and more specifically to an area in west central Saskatchewan, east central Alberta, where a thing called the Frog Lake Massacre took place. More on that in a minute. But taking that train is a pretty fraught journey. It's the means, the way that soldiers came to come put down the Riel Rebellion in 1885. It's also, one could argue, a dead route. It's not well traveled anymore, and the things along that line are kind of derelict and dead. But yet it's an important route for this country. It's a train that they call the Canadian. When it goes from Toronto as far west as Vancouver, they number it number 1. When it comes back the other way, they give it the number 2. So this is Number 1 Canadian. Stutter stepping. The last fumes out of Ontario. Beds and sliding doors and dining cars tunneling through the forest, its genealogy of clear-cut, its firework trees new and hot. We show them our ghost stations. We show them tea at the window as birch die tangled in power lines, birch hauling lines down to the level of marsh, and marsh rising to meet electricity. This is the line. A propane tank every 50 clicks, wall-eyed chutes and utility corridors, gift-buying hours in the recreation car, and hints of lake and wood smoke if you're looking for them. No, oh my nation. No, God save our queen. No colonial imperative except in our being here. in what it means to shower on a moving train, track rolling under the drain hole, the luxurious pillows, my last-minute discount. This is what they starved a people for. Through tree scenes, tableau in the dome car, the soldiers, the settlers, the track laid, the way made, making goods of them. Servants, subjects, comrades, always more, and the trees smolder, the trace smoke and the camera's vision that comes of passing too fleetly. We pause at vistas and wildlife, coniferous worming at the periphery. A train car neat with men and their rifles. Outside, threads of camp smoke obscured by clouds, by trees. And ships full with people, flat and heavy, an ocean of skin. Skin seeping, weeping wounds and stomach virus, all the meat rancid in barrels, all the bacon rancid in the fort, and the Cree starving through winter, camped within sight of the stockpiles. And how hard it is for me to write what came before. And the tree planters paying down their, the tree planters paying down their student loans, their blisters an economy of impatience. The travelers restless rounding the big lakes, they buy the wild blueberries, they take photos of each other beside dead buildings along the line. They fixate in the dome car as the last light leaves the sky. They wonder why we're stopped here, why we're waiting again, every goddamn freight train, waiting, middle of nowhere. So the nucleus or the kernel of this book is an instant of violence that occurred on April 2nd, 1885, something we call the Frog Lake Massacre. I do this nearly every time I read. Has anyone heard of this? If I say Frog Lake Massacre, do you know what I'm talking about? A few of you. If I mention the Northwest Rebellion / Resistance, as it's more commonly called now, it's a few nods. Okay, good. Good, very good, in fact. So this book centers around the Frog Lake Massacre specifically. Frog Lake is a place in what is now Alberta, east central Alberta. Big Bear, the renowned Plains Cree chief, renowned as a diplomat, a peace-loving person, and a skeptical person, skeptical to make treaty with the Canadian government, and skeptical about how good a reserve would be for his people. He was told to take his some 1,000 people to Frog Lake. This was at a point in 1884, 1885, when the buffalo had been commercially hunted off the prairies. Their main source of sustenance was gone. Big Bear's numbers, his community's numbers had swollen to about 1,000 because people similar to him were skeptical about the government's intentions and their ability to keep the promises they said they were going to make. So he had a lot of people to feed. He decided, okay, I'm going to sign this treaty. They were in the process of looking for a place for a reserve. The government said, if you want rations, go to Frog Lake. And put him and his people under the eye of one of the most notoriously cruel Indian agents in the area, a guy named Thomas Quinn. Really tense situation there between Big Bear's band, and especially the young men in his band, and the settlers and the farm instructors and the Indian agent at Frog Lake, which ended in a moment of extreme violence. Wandering Spirit, who was Big Bear's war chief, shot Thomas Quinn after exchange that sort of indicated Thomas Quinn's refusal to sort of go with Wandering Spirit into his camp. He was shot and killed, and 8 others after that. 8 other settlers were killed. That's the story, the way we tell it. It's now being somewhat realized that there were others that died as well. There's a grave at Frog Lake with 9 crosses, and indications that there's bodies under the ground just beside that have been unmarked since 1885. So it was a moment of pretty intense violence, and it led to the largest hanging in Canadian history in November of that same year. Wandering Spirit and 5 others were convicted of treason after what we would think of as a sham trial, really unjust trial, and they were buried in an unmarked grave outside of a town called Battleford in Saskatchewan. You can't get to this grave by any road. It doesn't make the tourist maps. You have to pretend you're a camper in the campground beside the gravesite and hop the fence and go down into the river valley to see the memorial that now exists at the site that they were buried. So my explanation of this is longer than the poem itself, so I'll read Battleford gravesite for you now. This is basically about going to find that site. Tonight the clouds are tall and turquoise. North Battleford along the motel strip. Pickup trucks darkly uniform, kitted out, wide, lined up in the parking lot. Dump trucks head to toe along the service road. You'll be talked to in your dream tonight. You'll learn how things are done here. You'll forget. There'll be lightning, then the sun will push out like an egg, metallic and hard before receding into redness. You won't sleep long. In the morning, the Battle River will sparkle nearly white, and it's too much. Your eyes can't take that much brightness. Beyond the fort site, behind the campsite, down in the valley overlooking ball fields, angled at the river, away, the 8 bodies turned under grassland. Wandering Spirit sung to his wife, still unfinished underground. The saplings making cover, rocking themselves. Your camera, your hands, your mouth, your feet soft but for the dust clouds, though it rained last night, or was that your dream? The 8 poles above the scrub line in your photo. Show some respect and keep your distance. Though with no paved route, no federal plaque, you don't know what respect is. Colony of raspberries thick within the chain link penning in the burial site. The song to a wife. 3 cigarettes for the stone. A death song mixed with earth. The wind above, the poplars shielding. The sun above, the poplars diffusing. The film canisters you thought you'd fill with dirt. The names you write on a receipt from Fort Battleford. Kape Pamanchakweo. Papa Mekisik. Manchus. Kitawa Kini. Napes. Apischaskus. All Mistahimaskwa's men, plus 2 who killed cut knife settlers, Itka and Weywinich. The young man in loose red serge packing a cannon will soon be replaced by an interpretive sign. And the one sign you need to see most is not here. November 27th, 1885, 8 in the morning. Wandering Spirit, round the sky, bad arrow, miserable man, iron body, little bear, crooked leg, and man without blood. The grass matted, the sun whitening. River gold in the eye, in the distance. Tonight you'll sing their names out the window of your motel room. You'll gape as the city gathers its pickups and particle board, its flagpoles and power lines, vacancy, no vacancy signals. Clouds like stories, as high as you can see, dark turquoise. And I think I'll just read one more here. It's a poem I wrote on the bus from London to Toronto in the spring of 2015. I had just heard that Omar Khadr got granted bail, and he was being set free into the city of Edmonton, which is where I grew up. And so I wrote a poem to introduce him to this place he was going to go live, and the college that he was going to be attending, which is right close to where my grandparents used to live. This poem starts with an epigraph that I thieved from a pamphlet. A group of people in Regina would have a vigil for Omar Khadr every Wednesday at lunchtime, and they put out a pamphlet that I happened to come across when I was in that city and stole from it. So it starts with this epigraph. In praise of Omar Khadr. When Khadr was repatriated, he spent several months in isolation. He was put on food line duty. He refused to give an inmate more than his share. The inmate threatened to stab him. He was put back into isolation. He spent 23 hours a day in solitary confinement. He was moved to Edmonton Institution. He was moved away from the threat. He was closer to his English professor. When he was being denied educational opportunities at Guantanamo Bay, his lawyer was smuggling lesson plans in his boot. There's a set of tracks on 50th Street between the Sherwood Park Freeway and Baseline Road. Roads that changed their names to 82 and 101 avenues at the eastern lip of the city, though the borders pushed, faded by industrial bloat and oil field fabricators, the scrapyards, the landscape suppliers, blurring this in-between zone. So the boundary shows on nothing anymore but the street signs and the still fresh selves of the people, many of whom have clear memory of a way and struggle to keep track of this place. It can be a nightmare to look at this part of the city. The exhaust clouds pile. People know the term inversion. I spent hours of my childhood sitting at these tracks on 50th, not much to look at except birds and bugs and business parks, the graveled sod, and the university's book depository disguised as a furniture warehouse. I sat in this non-place, often with my family, idling, fiddling with the radio dials, waiting to go north to see my grandparents. Whole generations of humans hate these tracks. They dread these tracks. They come to rest in front of an unmoving train laid across this road, and a part of them, a part they think is truly being violated, implodes. The trains are slow going. They're generative. These are economic pauses, which in any other circumstance, most in this line would salute. And when people are brought to a stop, to wait, boxed in again, they wheel over meridians, they scream and lay patches of rubber, they touch each other's bumpers. If they stay still another second, so help me, they hurl profanities and lay on the horn. Move, fucking inch forward, just another hair and I can 180 and get the fuck out of here. Wrong way down a one-way street, I don't give a shit. On the other side of these tracks, just past Shipwreck Marine and Cleaver Automotive, is the turnoff to my grandparents. A lot I have no right to stand on anymore. Just past that turn is your school. Its campus is unremarkable. It blends. You know it's a campus because there are picnic tables and a crosswalk, people who understand the need to keep one's empathy lit in order to survive this life. One passes by this place, this school, so easily. Small pockets, instants of refuge disguise themselves, and with good reason, a lesson plan in a boot. But they need to be remembered and returned to. A warehouse full of books disguised. A red-winged blackbird pushing through grass and wind. A college. Like anywhere, people jig on the very edge of life every day through no choice of their own. There are predators here, and they make prey, and only some can afford refuge. The yellow ribbons stuck to the backs of pickup trucks make it clear where the line is. Stronger, deeper is Amiskwaskahigan, Beaver Mountain House, and Pehonan, the waiting place. Edmonton, the Rossdale Flats, the good land beside the river. They've thrown up lots of barriers to it. The gathering place. Riel's grandfather lived here. You can still approach it more easily by the water. The city's getting better at giving itself its names back, its languages back. The good dismantling has begun. The good reckoning with the city's sharper edges. People learning how they came to be stopped for this train. And I've learned a few things from you and from my home. Where I come from, I should know at least 5 languages, but I only know 1. To sit before a loading train helps you learn what to love about waiting. To live your life with empathy is possible anywhere. The biggest miracle of all, perhaps. We still have pockets of refuge. Their instruments have always been too blunt. Thank you very much.
Hello. Pockets of dismantling, pockets of reckoning. That really speaks to me. I'm very excited to read here today at Words Fest in general. It's fantastic. Congratulations to all the organizers and to the audiences who've come. These events often are about listening so much, and I want to let you know that your listening is a form of conversation that I very much feel we're having, and I look forward to how we have an exchange later. I'm going to read from 2 books because they were written essentially during the same period over the last 5 years. It was a period where there was a lot of family change and illness and death. There was a lot of change in my own life, and there was a lot of dissembling, I would say, of modes of being that allowed me to think about form. I think that's always a good question for us as artists and writers. How do we write? What form are we choosing to use? What kind of address works in relation to various circumstances? And as a poet, I have often chosen to write series. I like versions of texts. I like to come to a text and then to come back to it and rework it and have this sense of time where I interact with the text and allow it to change. Multitudes is a book of poetry that interacts with the ideas of the Whitman, Walt Whitman's notion of the liberal democratic subject, but sort of in the age of social media. I've been quite interested in how it is we've created this technology that allows us to have multiple simultaneous kinds of conversations across space and time, and ways that our technology is allowing us to bring ourselves almost into a kind of telepathic intimacy. At the same time, our bodies are often getting left out of it, or bodies seem to be becoming erased. So I want to start with a poem that thinks a little bit about how it is that we can carry our bodies through language for the purpose of touching another. This is called Threshold. Push words into body. Do those words form a column or spiral? Do those words coalesce as body into the body they conjure? Push words into mouth. Do those words form a tongue or jetty? Is a probe formed that touches the tongue it entangles? Push words onto mound of nipple, onto mounded nipple jewels. Do words circulate as honey, as tentacles that leaven and stiffen? Are words the door slab we cross, or the instepping over? Do words think what they want, or rush in, impartial? Fasten words into armpits, knee backs, elbow fronts. Do these words moving into view bulk or break like touch, or are they just its cushions? Do I cock my head sideways, peer along tubal promontories, and at this occult angle drench my throat in letters? Do I tongue roll speech? Do I usher words into corridors we recognize, or do new phrases fissure the organism? Pack syllables into glands, deliver glandular phonemes glad to open, proposition palms moistening in response, wave words toward portals as if bright green pennants signal presence at the threshold. Do words gush good manners? Do words think about waiting? Can words hold back or off or away until the body goes rigid and dirigible? A warm headwind pushes against the body the way words do. Words form a column or spiral of headwind, and it is honeyed, it is tentacled, it is probing. Words suckle the column and nipple the mound, delve inside ducts and shovel out insides. Let's push words into coming, gnash words into coming, into body, shove grammar onto parts, load coming into each. Is it the threshold of coming or the deep thrash of asking? I wonder, do words have any clue? I wonder if words hold me or if you do. Maybe there's zero here, save our so green thresholds. That poem is about sexting and the way that we now have a technology that is only going to expand into the sort of hyper importation of our bodies into this virtual space together. And I'm interested in virtuality in the present and the future, but also as our primary way of encountering the past, of being somehow reconstructive and accessing notions of the past. I'm going to read just a little bit more from Multitudes, and I'm going to read from a section that is called Play, and it's entirely made of Facebook status updates that I did actually make and circulate. I want us to think a little bit about how we've all become publishers, how the writer identity that used to be sort of over here is now really an identity that involves going public and being public and circulating in public space. And in some way that we have a very different sense of audience, of listenership, of the commons when we're in virtual spaces, when we're putting text directly into public. I find it a very interesting space, and also a space that can be very poetically playful. The period that these updates correspond to is the year 2012, when my mother had a very devastating stroke that kind of erased most of her language. Some of what I'm reading today will interact with the change that occurred, where I no longer had access to a storied self in my parent. But it also was a time when I traveled to England and Greece to visit the villages of my grandmothers, and I was very much listening to the local, in the sense of going to place and being in place that Laurie is talking about in her work, where there is this need to go to physical spaces and topographies and experience them, to understand the history that you may catch wind of, but you don't necessarily know until you've gone to those places, and they take on a very different sense. So some of these little status updates were also posted during this period of 2 months of travel, and I'll just read a few. You can get a sense of how this sequence works. January 11, 2012. Library vibrancy, solo, silence, silo, my kind of shush. January 23, 2012. Only bright spot of the last 3 days was provided by the sizzling hot female paramedics. January 24, 2012. Has to comment on the huge infrastructure of sense-making involved in a sentence like the above. We take it for granted every second. March 1, 2012. Too much, enough, not enough, much too little, and over. Revise the measure. April 25, 2012. Famous first words. May 3, 2012. Swall, swallow, wallow, allow, low, ow. The draw of words has its own progressions, always furious and lurid and turgid, and so it goes, onward. May 8, 2012. What does one wear to a first class in Trojan tragedy? June 11, 2012. Imagining young Avril Lavigne as Iphigenia and Cobain at the end as Orestes, both singing, "Mama, take this badge off of me." July 9, 2012. Is noticing more often than any time, Margaret Christakos is noticing more often that any time there's any kind of conversation about anything in this country, it's called a brouhaha. September 16, 2012. Thinking about how writers have always been derided for wasting time in cafes, on terraces, patio slackers, and now we're told it's a waste of time to be on Facebook. But there's enough that's new and intriguing about the poetics of this polyvocal improvisational milieu that I feel I learn from it. Present, present. If only someone would bring me my absinthe. September 26, 2012. Brain feeling a little on the verge of. October 6, 2012. On a 6-week trip visiting sites significant to my grandmother's early lives before they emigrated, one from Britain, one from Greece, both 1914-15, at the age of 15, and thinking about autobiography, self-narrativity, and girls' changing self-display practices over several eras. October 18, 2012. The antiquities are breath-robbing, but the Wi-Fi is, alas, for shit. October 18, 2012. Electra, I am on your side, girl. October 20, 2012. A colossal limestone female head. November 7, 2012. Tonight in Athens saw an unending stream of citizens coherently hitting the streets, young people, elderly people, many workers, families. December 6, 2012. A bunch of feminists. Abkef hi imnostu sini fok nuba. December 29, 2012. Just simul read Idle No More as I Die No More. February 3rd, 2013. Doing, going, going, doing, going, doing, going, going, doing, doing, going. How it's going? It's doing. February 7, 2013. So not Twitter. You read it and you read it again, you read it again, and you are reading it. Gains. March 2, 2013. Thinks teenaged girls must have been the inspiration for the internet. They are the zenith of everybody talking and listening simultaneously. March 28, 2013. Facebook is a little time-lapse, fast lap from the poetics of direct confessional lyric address to meta-lyric practices of indirect documentary, constraint, and conceptualism, due in large part to a negotiation with the audience, public commons, as both known and anonymous. March 28, 2013. Let's pretend you're unanimous. Okay, that's it for now. See ya. Her Paraphernalia is a book that also took its jumping off point from the stroke that my mother had. That sounds like I knew what I was writing. I didn't. I spent the next 4 years essentially trying to figure out what to write. But there was some way in which my mother's loss of language made me relate to her body much more deeply. And this was a form of communication we hadn't had before. And it created a situation where I realized that I really didn't have an embodied connection to the women of my family lines. It didn't matter that I'd been involved in feminism for 35 years. I really didn't have an embodied sense of being connected to other women. At this particular time when my mom became ill, my daughter was 15, and I recognized that both of my grandmothers had been 15 when they came to Canada. And I started to try to map a little bit more the relationship of how to see the self and how to see the connection that we have as women to other women. And I used photography and the selfie as a way to do that, along with the traveling and the interacting with family. So I'm just going to read a few texts from her Paraphernalia. Am I doing okay for time, Dave? Yeah. Okay. I'll just give you a sense of addressing a couple of, there's a lot of direct address in the book. A lot is addressed to my daughter. This particular text is directed to my grandmothers. How is it you knew who you were, or your worth, your worthiness in the world, before or without pervasive forms of portraiture supporting your self-image? When you were born, was your mother's gaze upon you steady, emphatic, prodigal? You were each the first girl child or the first girl to survive, the eldest daughter to a young mother. Did she see herself reflected in your iris, transferring her own mother's imprint onto you? It's all a little idealized, a performance I want to isolate and invest with importance. If you were seen, you were mirrored, and isn't that the photograph's surrogate slate of gaze, mama mnemonics? What you are trying to recreate is a slide of her eyes across your own. Just a little piece about my great-grandmother, Demetra, on her journey. Today occurs this idea that solitude unfurls one to see oneself, to begin to pitch self both here and there, to create a screen to sit on both sides of. Perhaps there were 2 weeks across an ocean when she, Demetra, saw herself both sides of this unfurling screen. Family left in the village, groomed to collect her. 2 weeks on a rollicking ship across an entire continent of water. Her unsealed vestibule for just that solo time. Did she look in a mirror at existence? Did she chimeroar? She is 15, unmothered, about to bride. Did the unknowable excite? As with many women of any previous generation, both my grandmothers had multiple miscarriages and experiences with stillbirth and children who died. And I started to think about how intergenerational memory can include that sort of rippling despair. And I realized after having a couple of miscarriages myself that there might be some connection to this feeling I've always had of not really being embodied very consistently. So this piece is kind of about that sense of, is it possible that perhaps the idea of precarity in pregnancy might have been something that affected my own self-concept. I started out this morning to write about time warp for being at the lake this visit now for 11 days. This is up in Sudbury, where I'm from. I sense a familiar dislocation of myself from my real life and a flotation or suspension in what I often experience as a kind of adriftness out of time's proper consistency. It is not mere holiday mind, but a much deeper limbo I have struggled with my whole life. Writing grounds me. It literally strings me to the earth again, and I wonder if this sense of alocation is also a bit genetic. The high pocket of air one finds in a cavern filled almost to its ceiling, the place you bob with a concentrated focus on each breath coming in and filtering oxygen through the organism, through your own body, as if no other element need be addressed. And then you stay there in that space, in that bobbing concern, that insuck and exhale. And it's dark, and water surrounds all of the body's voice below the throat, and breath sound echoes in the belly, and beyond the cave there's a steady wash of rhythmic waves smashing the grotto's exterior. And this might go on for quite a while, and you bob and wait to see if you will be slowly drowned inside the cave as the tide rises and be miscarried, or if you will make it out of the cave alive only to choke on the larger influx of unmuted waves, or if you will make it out of the cave alive and rise up from those churning waters and be held and manage to live. And I'm going to finish with a piece that I think will perhaps dovetail into the conversation we'll have. Like many settlers, I'm second-generation Canadian, so all of my grandparents were immigrants. They all came within a few years of each other, and that was in around 1912 to 1915. The time when I wrote this book was 100 years later, so I was working with that rubric of 100 years, and I was myself 50 at that time. And I wanted to try to write a piece just about that sense of time, how as settlers we so rarely have any information about the past. Family story doesn't seem to extend past a couple of generations. It often doesn't extend back to the countries we've come from, nor does it ever extend into the reality of the history in Canada. So this was just a meditation on 100 years. Why is 100 years so totemic? At 50, I understood standing at and within the palpable middle of the cycle of one full century. My maternal great-grandmother, Amy Sophia née Henson Cowsell, had lived to the age of 99. I suppose she imprinted on me the fabled odds of a woman's long life. I'm kind of going to skip down because I don't want it to be too long. I'm sitting on Lake Ramsay in Sudbury, looking across the lake at the hospital where I was born. The hospital is ramshackle on the insides now, an empty monument, while the city negotiates how to turn the Lakeview land it stands upon into condominia. But there it remains, my birthplace. When I sit here staring at that geometric red structure in its high skirt of green maple crowns, hooded by a vast eggshell blue sky, speckled by the unrepentant chuff smoke of the superstack, I am hearing the lake's waves remind me of my grandmother's arrivals, a transfer which does not end but makes physical all of the displacements and relocations involved in this land taken from Indigenous hands. The lake continues to move as an analog of experience, unfixed, full of pollutants and loosed particles of the other elements, the violence of soil dissembling, thought on its floats and dips, life thirst, need for change, need for shore, swimming in the continuum, iron ore as a limit, weeds, dead branch chunks shunted onto lake bottom, soap scum, excrement of gulls, ducks, geese, crows, plastic, general crud, reflected cumuli, City's electrical buzz singeing the liquid lake muscle, canoe ribs from early 20th century drownings, and incessantly moving spiritual tentacles of all the indigenous people who lived and were displaced and died here over the many human generations of this lake's realities, so replete with concatenated co-presence that my working idea of one select century gushes open, rushing wide at both its calendar ends into the past and into the future. Long sentences to me give the sense of time that belongs to beyond the pale of a settler's Eurocentric centuries interval. Thanks very much. You can stay there?
I'm going to stay. You can now have the most comfortable chair in the world. Thank you very much, Laurie, Margaret, for those really captivating and thought-provoking readings. I'm going to ask 2 questions of you guys, and then you will respond. So one of the first things that came to my mind when I was looking for a connection between the 2 of your work was women. And I had read that review, which stuck with me, about Rove in the Mallet Review, where the reviewer compares Rove formally to Women's Leaves of Grass. You don't know about this?
I do, I just don't believe it.
Okay, great. Yeah. And whereas Margaret, obviously, much more self-consciously, is provoking and evoking women and dealing with women. So I wondered if you need to speak about the relation of women to your work.
Oh, geez, yeah, well, oh, golly. For me, there's a really close Whitman-Ginsburg connection, and the 2 of them were pretty important for me when I was first starting to write. They, if you don't know their work, they go long. They go, their lines are often really wide on the page, and their poems are often just unconscionably long. No, just kidding. They're wonderfully extended examinations of the life that they, or the society they found themselves in, the world they found themselves in. So that was big for me at a crucial time, realizing that I could sort of toy with the right margin as much as the left in a way, because I ended up doing a similar thing. So in terms of form, style, that was influential, definitely.
Yeah, I love that permission to go maximalist and really explore the idea of a dress as a space that doesn't have to correspond to the 3-minute pop song or the 30-second ad break. All forms that were pretty big during the 70s when I was growing up. Also, though, with Whitman, for me, it was the interest in the sensuous body, in the sense of experiencing not only the natural world, but the human world, the extended human world, in a very empathetic, sensualized way, which is, part of poetry is really understanding through the senses and understanding through the body. So that very much speaks to me. Whitman also had been a nurse, and he'd gone through war. He was actually not, he was able to understand the full panoply of human emotion, and I think there are very few. And he was also queer, so there was this extravagance to his own sense of having a multiple self that allowed him to think about the multiplicity inside of us. And I've found that very, very, it has a lot of legs. It keeps having a lot of legs. Whitman has legs. But I also want to connect him. Oh, man, look at that work differently. Could you hear any of that? Sorry about that. Yeah, I also want to connect to B.P. Nichol, who was, I don't know if you were you affected by B.P. Nichol at all? Because B.P. also wrote about the railroad in the entirety of the country and had that interest in very deep interest in the longer story, the bigger structure, the extended attention. Gerald Lampert.
I like that trajectory. Add B.P. Nichol to Ginsburg and Whitman, absolutely.
Yeah.
Nice
Great, thanks a lot. I like the soundbite "Women has legs," especially for someone who identifies as a walker in the field of letters. It was definitely something that I was thinking about, that flutter aspect of women and the sense of motion embodied in the line itself, which I found in both of your work in surprisingly various ways. So I'm going to ask you about history then. Laurie, in Southern Education, is dealing with a very kind of particular historical moment and the way that unfolds into the now, I guess, and the way that gets mediated. And Margaret kind of dealing with social media, a topic that is so incredibly imminently present that it's hard to I think it's hard to really understand kind of what's at stake. You know what I mean? So whether we could speak a bit about the relationship between history and the now and how that kind of develops in your poesis, that'd be awesome.
Well, actually, I probably would respond to that question in relation to her paraphernalia a bit more, because my family was involved in all of the proto-colonizing industries. My grandfather was a lumber baron in northern Ontario. My great-grandfather basically started out by selling sandwiches along the railway track in Sudbury before he became a lunch bar owner. And in the book, I investigate some of the incredibly loaded and layered predicaments of being actively involved in as well as we all are. But when you investigate family history as a settler, you have to be willing to look at, well, what then were you doing, and how is your own history tied directly into what we can think of as old history, but it's very living.
And for me, I was writing this book, I was writing it mostly in Toronto, and I found myself just sort of digging into the written history of that area, and the Frog Lake Massacre in particular. I get up from my desk, I go walk around the streets of Toronto, and I was seeing it around me. It was seemingly thousands of kilometers away, but it exists in the present tense in a way that I was trying to, I ended up trying to articulate in the book. And that's, I think, why it ended up becoming poetry, because I tried writing essays about this, and there was no direct way to exactly make the connection between the two. And I was also trying to articulate the omission, the great extended program of omitting the story that brought us all, us non-Indigenous folks here. So that was also always in my mind, seeing the monuments in Toronto and how there's monuments to the other side, essentially, and all that. So yeah, there was a lot of play between past and present to me, and there was a real feeling that we're still living in the era that when we talk about history, we're talking about an era that we all still exist in.
And I think the internet is about simultaneity, and so it actually gives us a lot more of a model for the way we become mobile in our own consciousness, but also and you see this in the younger generations. They are simply used to pursuing and inhabiting numerous narrative discourses at the same time. And it's not inattention, it's a completely different kind of attention. And I think some of it is great capacity to sort of make connections that certainly my generation was actively discouraged from making. Yeah, as you're saying.
Very cool. Well, as the official Zamboni driver of this conversation, I think I'm going to sound the horn. Thank you very much. Let's all give Laurie and Margaret